When the coroner peeled James Gray's body from his favorite recliner, they found a note crumpled in his pocket. 5 words, hastily scribbled. He knows. Stop him. Now. That was the moment everything changed. Welcome to Through Crime, your portal into the most chilling true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and the darkest corners of criminal history. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on this video, and if you are new here, do well to hit the subscribe button. We dig deep into the facts, uncover shocking twists, and explore the theories that keep investigators and the world on edge. Stay back and enjoy. In July of 2007, the sleepy town of Willow Creek, Kentucky, woke up to horror. James and Vivian Gray, quiet, church-going retirees, were found murdered in their modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. James was shot once in the chest, still clutching the TV remote. Vivian lay face down in the kitchen, blood pooled near a shattered jar of peach preserves. The couple had lived in that house for 42 years. Everyone in Willow Creek knew them. They raised one son, Anthony Gray, who, according to locals, was off. Not dangerous, just off. He moved to Louisville years ago, worked odd jobs, and rarely came home, except when he needed money. And that's exactly why he was in town the weekend they were killed. Police didn't have to look far. Anthony Gray was already at the house when officers arrived, standing in the front yard, pacing, talking to himself. He was the one who called 911. His story? He came by to check on his parents and found them dead. But his behavior was weird. While neighbors stood in shock, Anthony joked about his dad finally shutting up for good. He told one woman, "I guess I'm an orphan now. Wonder if there's a check in it for me." Cops picked up on that quickly. Then they learned Anthony had once accused his parents of emotionally abusing him and stealing an inheritance left by his grandmother. In fact, just a month earlier, Anthony had sent James a furious email titled, "I hope you rot." That email made him suspect number 1. But 3 days later, detectives searching the Gray home made a discovery that rewired the case entirely. Behind a cabinet in the basement, they found a hidden crawlspace. Inside, dozens of old VHS tapes, carefully labeled in James's handwriting. Many were dated between 1989 and 1995. When police watched the tapes, what they saw turned their stomachs. James Gray wasn't the simple, God-fearing man everyone thought he was. He was a predator. He had filmed young women, some barely teenagers, inside that house. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with Vivian in the room. Worse yet, at least one of the girls was later identified as a missing local teen who vanished in 1992 and was never found. Now Anthony's rage started to make sense. But here's the twist. Police discovered Anthony had never seen the tapes. He didn't know the full extent of his parents' darkness. His hatred was based on personal pain, abuse, manipulation, and being disowned over a falling out he once described to a friend as, "the day I realized I was just a puppet to them." So if Anthony didn't kill them, who did? A week later, another name surfaced, Lori Daniels, a hospice nurse who had been caring for Vivian in the months leading up to the murder. Quiet, kind, mid-30s, with a warm smile that masked a brutal past. Her younger sister, Melissa Daniels, had been one of the girls in James's tapes. Melissa ran away in '94. She never came back. Lori had been living with that loss for over a decade, until she walked into the Gray household as Vivian's nurse and saw a photo of James on the mantel. She never told the police. Not then. But it was clear she knew. Just as Lori was being brought in for questioning, Anthony Gray shocked everyone by walking into the sheriff's office and turning himself in. He confessed. Said he snapped. Claimed he found out everything about the tapes, the girls, what his parents had done, and lost control. He shot his dad in the living room, then his mom in the kitchen. It was believable. Tragic. But investigators weren't buying it. For one, ballistics showed 2 different guns were used. James was killed with a .38 revolver. Vivian was shot with a 9mm. Anthony only had access to one. With pressure mounting, Lori finally cracked. In a taped interview, she broke down and told the real story. She'd found the tapes. All of them. On the 3rd day of her nursing shift, while cleaning the basement. She recognized her sister on one of them. And in her words, "I stopped being a nurse that day. I became her avenger." But she didn't act alone. Vivian had caught her watching the tapes. In a panic, Lori pulled her gun. Things spiraled. She shot Vivian during a struggle in the kitchen. She didn't even plan to hurt James until Anthony showed up. The two stared at each other in the living room. Lori was holding the gun. Anthony spotted his father, slumped and dead. Then he looked at the TV, paused on a frozen image of a girl he didn't recognize. It didn't take him long to connect the dots. He didn't say a word. Instead, he walked into the garage, retrieved a revolver from his truck, came back, and calmly said, "Let's finish this." That's when he shot James. In the end, neither Lori nor Anthony went to prison for murder. Anthony was charged with obstruction and unlawful possession of a firearm. He served 18 months. Lori was sentenced to 5 years for manslaughter, but was released after 3. Some say justice was served. Others say 2 killers walked free. But everyone agrees on one thing: the Grays were not who they seemed. That cryptic note in James's pocket, "He knows. Stop him. Now," was never conclusively linked to anyone. But it begs the question, who was James afraid of? Anthony? Lori? Or someone else entirely? 6 months after the Gray murders, a hunter stumbled on a shallow grave in the woods outside Willow Creek. Inside, he found the skeleton of a teenage girl, a rusted pistol, and something else. A silver locket. Inside was a photo of 2 sisters. One of them was Melissa Daniels. In 2007, James and Vivian Gray were murdered in their home. Initially, their estranged son Anthony Gray was the prime suspect. But soon, the truth unraveled a dark past. James Gray had a secret life, a predator who filmed young girls in his basement. One of those girls was Melissa Daniels, a teen who vanished in 1994. Her older sister Lori, a hospice nurse who had cared for Vivian, discovered the tapes and exacted her revenge, killing Vivian in a struggle. When Anthony arrived and learned the truth, he executed James himself. Both walked away with minor sentences. It should have ended there. It didn't. November 2007, just before Thanksgiving. A hunter named Dale Morris was tracking a buck through the woods near Briarwood Hollow, about 10 miles from the Gray property. He noticed something odd, an area where the ground looked freshly disturbed, though it hadn't rained in weeks. Curiosity got the best of him. He dug with his hands until he hit something hard. A rib cage. He called the police immediately. Forensics quickly identified the remains as belonging to Melissa Daniels, the missing girl from the tapes. But here's what chilled investigators. She hadn't been buried in '94 when she vanished. The autopsy showed she'd likely died no more than 5 years earlier, sometime in 2002. Melissa had been alive for 8 years after her disappearance. And someone had kept her hidden. Beside her remains, wrapped in plastic, was a third weapon, a .22 caliber pistol. It was rusted, but the serial number was still visible. Police traced it back to a man named Edward "Eddie" Braxton, a former deputy who served in Willow Creek until he quietly retired in the late '90s after a misconduct investigation that was buried from public record. Guess who Eddie Braxton had worked with? James Gray. Back when James was a deacon at the local church, he and Eddie had launched a youth recovery project, supposedly to help troubled girls. A community-funded mentorship program. but it was shut down after just 2 years when one of the girls went missing. That girl? Melissa Daniels. This changed everything. If Melissa had been alive until 2002 and died 5 years before her body was found, who was keeping her? And what? Detectives began re-interviewing anyone who had worked with James Gray in the 90s. One name kept popping up: Sharon Miller, a retired church secretary. She claimed she once saw Melissa being taken out of the church basement by Eddie late one night, looking drugged. But when she asked questions, Eddie told her it was counseling business and not to interfere. And there was something else. Sharon had seen a young woman on James's property around 2001. Thin, quiet. Sharon thought it was Anthony's girlfriend at the time. But Anthony didn't have a girlfriend. Then came the final blow. Inside a safety deposit box registered under James Gray's name, investigators found dozens of receipts, dated between 1996 and 2002, for medication, groceries, feminine hygiene products, and clothing in teen sizes. All delivered to a P.O. box registered under an alias, Braxton. Melissa Daniels hadn't been missing. She'd been held. Police believe James Gray and Eddie Braxton kept her hidden, likely in one of several abandoned properties owned by Eddie under shell companies. After the Gray murders, Eddie vanished. His home was empty. Car gone. Bank accounts cleaned out. But the locket found in Melissa's grave raised another question. Because that photo of the two girls? It was taken in 2003, long after Melissa was reported missing. Lori Daniels had a copy of the same photo. She told police she took it the day Melissa briefly escaped and showed up at her apartment in Lexington. Melissa had refused to go to police. Said they would kill Lori if she talked. Lori gave her food, money, and begged her to stay. Melissa disappeared that same night. Lori never told anyone, until now. She collapsed in tears during her second interview. She was so scared, she whispered. She said they had a gun and proof that would ruin my life. A week later, police discovered Eddie Braxton's truck abandoned near the Tennessee border. In the glove box, they found a handwritten note. "We did what we had to." She was going to talk. Jimmy panicked. "I buried her because I was the only one who could do it right. If you find this, you know who's next." He signed it, E. But here's the thing. The handwriting wasn't Eddie's. It was Vivian Gray's. Vivian, the quiet housewife everyone thought was an accessory at best, was, in her own words, the cleaner. The one who made the problems disappear. The one who watched the tapes. Who threatened Melissa. Who may have pulled the trigger. Anthony killed her thinking he was silencing the woman who enabled James. He may have killed the one person who orchestrated everything. Authorities now believe at least 2 more girls seen on James's tapes were never identified, and may still be out there. Melissa's case blew the door wide open. And as for Eddie Braxton? He's still missing. But last week, someone used his social security number to rent a storage unit in Georgia. Inside was a mattress, a chain, a box of teenage clothes, and a freshly opened bottle of peach preserves. The hunt for Eddie Braxton begins, and a new survivor steps forward, claiming she was the last girl held captive by the Grays and their inner circle. What she reveals could expose a decades-long trafficking ring operating under the guise of small-town charity. And she's naming names. When 19-year-old April Keller showed up at a roadside diner in Georgia barefoot, bruised, and silent, holding nothing but a Bible and a flash drive, no one knew who she was. But what was on that flash drive blew open the biggest scandal Willow Creek had ever buried. James and Vivian Gray were murdered in 2007, but their deaths unearthed far darker secrets. James, once seen as a respected community figure, was exposed as a serial predator who filmed young girls in his basement, some of whom were never seen again. His wife, Vivian, wasn't just complicit, she was active in covering up the crimes. Their son, Anthony, and a hospice nurse named Lori Daniels were both drawn into the murder, each believing they were serving justice. When Melissa Daniels' remains were found in a shallow grave, it led investigators to a former deputy, Eddie Braxton, believed to have helped James and Vivian hold girls captive for over a decade. Then he vanished, until a flash drive surfaced, and a girl no one expected. April Keller was reported missing from Macon, Georgia, in 2022. Her mother believed she ran away. But April was taken, lured by a fake church-run rehab program promising spiritual renewal for troubled teens. It wasn't a church. It was a funnel, a pipeline stretching from rural towns across the South to a secret system of hidden homes and abandoned properties owned by shell companies tied back to Eddie Braxton and James Gray. April escaped after 3 years. She was kept in a farmhouse, just 2 miles from where Melissa Daniels had once been held. The flash drive April brought contained 43 videos. Many were older footage, surveillance clips from inside the Gray basement, time-stamped as far back as 1991. But the last 3 were recent, taken in 2023. They showed April, chained to a bed, a man entering the room. He never showed his face, but his voice was unmistakable. It was Eddie Braxton. The FBI confirmed it. April had escaped a property that had once belonged to Braxton's cousin, signed over in 2009. It had a soundproof basement, blood-stained sheets, and a handwritten list of names scribbled on the wall in pencil. There were 11 names on that wall. 6 were girls reported missing between 1990 and 2015. 2 were still missing. 3 were confirmed dead, Melissa Daniels among them. The most disturbing part? Written beside each name were codes, dates, dollar amounts, and initials. One of those initials was JG. Another was VB. And at the bottom, IG. Anthony, now living under a new name in Ohio, was pulled back into the case. He had served 18 months for his role in the 2007 murders and quietly disappeared after release. Now, investigators believed he might have known more than he let on. He denied everything. But forensic accountants traced a payment made in 2006, just months before the murders, into an account tied to Anthony under a different alias. The amount? $10,000. The sender? A charity fund once operated by James Gray. When confronted, Anthony broke. He admitted he knew his parents had been involved in something terrible, something bigger than abuse or tapes. He said his father once told him, "Some girls aren't meant to be saved. They're currency." Anthony claimed he took the money because he was scared. Not complicit, just trying to run. But April's videos suggested something else. In one clip, a man refers to another young man who used to bring them in. April confirmed a second man had visited the farmhouse once in 2006. She didn't see his face, but she remembered his tattoo. It was a faded black spade, inked on the back of his left wrist. Anthony Gray has that tattoo. When Lori Daniels saw April's testimony on the news, she collapsed. The last time she had seen her sister Melissa was in that same farmhouse. And now, another girl had survived it. Lori requested a meeting with federal agents. She wanted a deal. She admitted to something new, something she'd kept buried since the day she killed Vivian. In 2001, Melissa had escaped captivity and made it to Lori's apartment. Lori took her in, but Melissa was panicked, insisting they couldn't go to the cops. "They have more than just tapes," she'd said. "They have people. In law enforcement. In the church. In foster care." And one of them was Anthony. Lori begged her to stay. She didn't. That night, Lori followed her and saw her get into a pickup truck, Anthony's pickup truck. Melissa was never seen again. Anthony had lived as both victim and villain. While he'd suffered under James and Vivian, the deeper truth was that he'd helped them too, whether out of fear, desperation, or something darker. April's courage cracked the final shell. In April 2025, Anthony Gray was arrested in Ohio and charged with human trafficking, conspiracy to commit abduction, and accessory to murder. He cried on the courtroom floor, screaming, "They made me do it." But the jury didn't buy it. April Keller is now living in a secure location under protective care. She's helped identify 4 other girls she was held with, 2 of whom were rescued from a property in Alabama last month. The truth? The Gray murders were never about just 2 dead bodies in a farmhouse. They were the door to a much older, much darker story. A network of hidden evil masked in religion, charity, and silence. And somewhere out there, Eddie Braxton is still alive. FBI surveillance has just picked up a burner phone registered to Braxton pinging near the Louisiana border. But what's more chilling? A photo posted anonymously on a dark web forum shows a young girl sitting on a familiar recliner, one that used to belong to James Gray. They thought it was over. It's just beginning. The photo surfaced on a dark web forum known for trafficking coded images. A young girl, no older than 12, sat silently in a worn-out brown recliner. But to federal agents working the Gray-Braxton case, the chair wasn't just familiar, it was proof that the network wasn't dead. That recliner once sat in James Gray's basement. And now it was somewhere new. The murders of James and Vivian Gray in 2007 cracked open a nightmare buried in the heart of Willow Creek, Kentucky. The seemingly quiet couple was behind a decades-long trafficking ring, aided by former Deputy Eddie Braxton and, as recently revealed, even their own son, Anthony Gray. Melissa Daniels, one of their victims, was buried in a shallow grave. Her sister Lori got revenge. Anthony confessed. But a surviving victim, April Keller, escaped from captivity in 2024 with a flash drive full of damning evidence. The crimes weren't over. The ring hadn't ended. And Eddie Braxton was still out there. The photo was uploaded to a site frequented by predators using coded language and image swaps. FBI cybercrime specialists ran an image match and were stunned. The wood-paneled wall. The 1970s-style lamp. The brown recliner. All pieces that once existed in James Gray's home. Items that should have been destroyed after the house was demolished in 2009. Except they weren't. April Keller had mentioned something in passing that agents now realized was vital. They took the furniture, too. Said it had sentimental value. Eddie had kept it. Agents cross-referenced the photo timestamp with recent pings from a burner phone suspected to belong to Braxton. The signal had briefly connected to a cell tower near Slocum Parish, Louisiana, a remote, wooded area with less than 300 residents. Within 24 hours, the FBI mobilized a task force. The plan was to quietly surveil properties within the tower's range. But what they discovered changed the operation from surveillance to full-blown raid. One of the abandoned homes, deeded to an offshore trust once tied to Braxton, showed signs of life. A solar panel on the roof, a satellite dish behind a broken shed, and security cameras disguised as birdhouses. They moved in. The moment they breached the front door, agents knew. It was another holding site. But this one was different. Rooms were split into themes. One was made to look like a hospital, another like a child's bedroom, all decorated in unsettling, outdated ways. As if whoever was running the place was trying to recreate memories from the past. Inside a locked closet, they found 3 girls, ages 10, 13, and 16. They had been sedated, and each wore a necklace engraved with initials. One read, LD, another, Fiji, and the youngest, VB, Vivian Braxton, a name that wasn't in the files. Until now, DNA tests confirmed what agents feared. The 10-year-old girl, labeled VB, was the biological daughter of James Gray and an unidentified victim. Born sometime around 2015. A child of captivity. Somehow, she'd been kept hidden all this time, passed around the inner ring like a possession. The photos, the videos, the names, they were just the surface. The Gray-Braxton network wasn't just trafficking, it was breeding. And Eddie? He was nowhere to be found. When April Keller saw the news of the Louisiana raid, she requested another meeting with federal agents. This time, she brought a diary, something she'd hidden during her captivity. In it, she mentioned a man named Father Edward. A spiritual figure who wasn't like James. He didn't abuse them, he conditioned them. Made them believe their pain had purpose. That being chosen was holy. He even baptized some of them. She said he had a burned hand. Right side. From an accident years ago. Braxton had a fire-related injury to his right hand. Confirmed. But here's the part that broke the room silent. April remembered something else he used to say. The recliner is the throne. The first one to sit in it was the mother of the covenant. The rest are daughters of her womb. This wasn't just trafficking. It was a cult. Haunted by what she now knew, Lori Daniels came back into the picture. She admitted she once heard Vivian say, "We're building a family. One that'll never break like ours did." Vivian wasn't just covering up for James, she was the architect. A woman whose trauma had twisted into generational control. Lori had killed her, thinking she was ending a monster. But the monster had already multiplied. A week after the raid, a photo was mailed to the FBI's Louisville office. No return address. Inside the envelope, a picture of a teenage girl brushing the hair of a smaller child. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, stood Eddie Braxton, older, thinner, wearing a priest's collar. On the back of the photo, scribbled in red ink, "The mother may be dead, but the father is still preaching. And the children? They're listening." The FBI launches an international manhunt for Eddie Braxton, now believed to be leading a covert cult operating under religious nonprofit cover. Meanwhile, another survivor comes forward, claiming she gave birth to James Gray's child in 2016, and that child is still missing. And worse? She says the real leader was never caught. Not Eddie. Not Vivian. But someone still living in Willow Creek. When former trafficking victim Anna Lee McMillan testified before a grand jury, she didn't just name Eddie Braxton. She pointed to a church newsletter and a smiling gray-haired woman in a choir robe. "That's her," she said. "That's the real leader. That's the one we called Mother Mercy." She wasn't dead. She wasn't hiding. She was respected. And she was right there in Willow Creek all along. James and Vivian Gray's 2007 murders exposed a horrifying child trafficking operation stretching far beyond the borders of their quiet Kentucky town. Their son Anthony, complicit and tormented, was finally convicted. A former deputy, Eddie Braxton, vanished. The surviving victim, April Keller, revealed the network's cult-like practices and the breeding of children inside remote compounds. In a raid in rural Louisiana, the FBI rescued 3 young girls and uncovered what agents now call a structured generational cult. One of the girls, identified by initials VB, was revealed to be James Gray's biological daughter, born in captivity. But in Part 4, we learned something chilling. Eddie Braxton wasn't the one in charge. There was someone above him. A woman known only as Mother Mercy. Anna Lee McMillan disappeared in 2014 at age 15. Her case went cold until she resurfaced, alive, in Mississippi in late 2024. Malnourished, traumatized, and desperate to find the son she'd given birth to in 2016. Fathered by one of her captors, Anna had spent nearly a decade living under cult control. She was part of what insiders called the new family, A shadow network of saved children, trained to believe the outside world was evil and that their suffering had been chosen by God. The one who preached it? A woman they called Mother Mercy. According to Anna, Mother Mercy was not Vivian Gray. Vivian, she said, was just the vessel. The real matriarch was someone else entirely. When the FBI showed Anna pictures from Willow Creek's 2005 community event, she stopped at one taken at the local church's Christmas pageant. A choir photo. One woman stood in the middle. Soft curls. A string of pearls. Warm smile. Hands folded perfectly in front. Anna trembled. That's her. That's the one who baptized me. That's the one who named my son after James. That's Mother Mercy. Her name? Esther Holloway. Esther Holloway was no stranger to Willow Creek. She had run the town's children's ministry for over 30 years. Organized soup kitchens. Led Bible studies. Volunteered at the adoption agency. She even helped write James Gray's original nonprofit charter in 1994. She was Vivian Gray's older sister. And somehow, no one had ever looked at her twice. It wasn't easy. Esther had scrubbed most of her online presence. No social media. No financial statements. No kids of her own. But agents finally got a break when they searched the original trust documents tied to one of the Louisiana properties. A shell company named Kingdom House Holdings had one shared director from 2002 to 2009. Holloway. That was enough for a warrant. And when they raided her property in early 2025, they found more than they bargained for. Hidden behind a false panel in Esther's bedroom closet, they found a locked safe. Inside, 12 Polaroid photographs of children never identified in any system. 2 antique Bibles with names and dates of baptisms scrawled in the margins. A silver crucifix covered in dried blood. And 1 VHS tape, labeled only. The first one. What was on the tape remains sealed in evidence. But agents who've seen it describe it as the birth of the family. Not just the abuse. Not just the indoctrination. But the initiation of the first girl, known only as Hope, being handed to James Gray in 1991, with both Vivian and Esther smiling in the background. Hope was never seen again. Esther Holloway was arrested in April 2025, charged with human trafficking, conspiracy to commit rape, ritual abuse, kidnapping, multiple counts of accessory to murder. In her first court appearance, she remained calm, smiling. When asked if she had anything to say, she simply replied, "You don't bury truth. It plants. And it grows." With Esther's arrest, Willow Creek has collapsed into itself. 3 more respected townspeople have been questioned. One a retired judge, another a former school counselor. Even the town's sheriff, who once investigated Melissa Daniels' disappearance, is under review. Because Melissa filed a report in 2001. And it disappeared. All roads lead back to Eddie Braxton. While Esther may have been the architect, Eddie was the hunter. The handler. The one who moved girls from state to state under fake programs, churches, and camps. And now, the FBI has a new clue. One of the girls rescued in Louisiana whispered something to a caseworker during therapy. Father Edwards said he would return to the mountain. That's where the mother lies buried. There's only one place that matches that in FBI files. Echo Mountain, West Virginia. The site of a long-abandoned mining camp once owned by James Gray's uncle. Braxton's fingerprints were found on a propane tank at a nearby cabin just last week. The FBI prepares for a coordinated raid on Echo Mountain. But what they're hearing from drone surveillance has agents on edge. Chants, singing, and children's voices. A fire is burning in the woods. And someone has built a stone altar. Eddie Braxton may not be hiding. He may be preparing a final sacrifice. Stay tuned for Part 6, The Mountain of Mercy. When federal agents reached the clearing atop Echo Mountain, they expected a firefight. Instead, they found children standing in a perfect circle, eyes closed, hands raised toward the sky. At the center of it all was Eddie Braxton, smiling, waiting, and whispering, "They were never mine. They were hers." Over the course of 6 chapters, we followed the unraveling of the horrifying Gray-Braxton child trafficking ring. A murder in 2007 exposed a sprawling network of abuse, indoctrination, and generational exploitation buried within a small Kentucky town. James and Vivian Gray weren't just criminals. They were part of a cult-like system that raised children in captivity and passed them through a secret network. Eddie Braxton, a former deputy and spiritual manipulator, escaped capture for nearly 2 decades. Esther Holloway, Vivian's sister, known to survivors as Mother Mercy, was unmasked as the mastermind. The survivors gave their testimonies. The community began to fracture. And now, the final piece of the puzzle led federal agents to a remote, forested hill in West Virginia, Echo Mountain. It began at dawn. Thermal drones had captured human movement deep in the trees. Singing, dancing, a bonfire surrounded by children. The FBI feared another holding compound, maybe even a ritual execution site. But as they descended, they were met with something stranger than violence. Children between the ages of 6 and 14 stood in a circle, chanting a prayer. Braxton was kneeling in the center, his hands bound by his own belt. His voice was calm, almost relieved. "It's done," he said. "She's gone. You can take them now." They arrested him without resistance. In a small, decaying cabin behind the ritual site, agents found 14 birth certificates, 6 stolen adoption files, journals written by Braxton, dated 2008 to 2025, and a locked trunk containing 3 fetal remains, mummified and wrapped in cloth, each with the name Esther written in ash on the lid. One journal entry read, "She said to plant the first ones. Said their bones would protect the harvest. When the day came, we'd bring them all home to the mountain." There were also videotapes, final proof of the cult's operations. None of the tapes showed Braxton abusing children. He didn't participate. He managed. He protected Esther's teachings. He expanded the network. But according to everything he left behind, he believed in what they were doing. After nearly 2 years of coordinated arrests, trials, and testimony, the full scale of the Gray-Braxton cult came to light. Over 47 victims identified across 6 states. At least 8 confirmed deaths of children born inside the ring. 3 former Willow Creek officials sentenced for aiding in cover-ups. 21 total convictions, including Esther Holloway and Eddie Braxton. The girls rescued from Echo Mountain were placed in trauma-centered recovery programs. Anna Lee McMillan was reunited with her son. April Keller published a memoir. Lori Daniels, the woman who shot Vivian Gray, was not charged. Prosecutors cited justified trauma response under extreme abuse and cover-up. At his sentencing hearing, Eddie Braxton didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he gave a short, chilling statement. "I didn't destroy lives. I preserved the covenant. We were building a family for the end times. And when that day comes, the mountain will open again." He was sentenced to 16 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. Willow Creek, once a symbol of American small-town pride, has become a ghost town. The church was shut down. The Gray home was bulldozed. The local school board was entirely replaced. A memorial now stands outside what used to be the Willow Creek Community Center. It reads, "For the children who were taken, for the ones who never made it home, and for those who fought to speak the truth, we hear you now." Esther Holloway died in prison in 2026, 6 months after her conviction. Heart failure. In her cell, they found one final letter addressed to Eddie Braxton. The last line read, "When the world forgets us, the mountain will remember, and the daughters will come home." This case wasn't just about murder, betrayal, or corruption. It was about what happens when evil hides behind righteousness, when authority becomes a mask, when the loudest prayers are meant to silence the screams. But truth, however late, still has power. Survivors stood up. The community cracked. And justice, though delayed, finally arrived. In 2027, hikers on Echo Mountain discovered a child's doll nailed to a tree with a note tied to its hand. "We are still watching. And we are still many." While the Gray-Braxton case is officially closed, the story may not be over, because some members of the new family, now grown, were never found. And the mountain? It still stands, silent, watching, waiting.